There's a particular kind of silence that some people don't run from. Not the lonely kind. Not the empty echo that makes a room feel too big. But a quiet that feels like breathing again after holding your breath all day. For some people, being alone is not a punishment. It's relief. It's the moment the noise stops. The moment no one is watching, judging, expecting, asking, correcting, or misunderstanding. And when that door closes and the world finally goes still, something inside them unclenches. Their shoulders drop. Their thoughts slow down. Their heart stops bracing for the next small injury. If you're someone who prefers to be alone, you've probably felt the strange tension that comes with that truth. People look at you with concern. They ask if you're okay. They assume something must be wrong. They say things like, "You should get out more. You're isolating yourself. Humans need people." And maybe you nod politely. Maybe you even try to explain yourself. But deep down, part of you knows something they don't. Being around people has never felt as simple as they say it is. For you, interaction isn't always light or effortless. Sometimes it feels like walking through a room filled with invisible wires, where one wrong step could trigger tension, conflict, or quiet rejection. So you learn something early in life that many people never have to think about. You learn that solitude can be safer than connection. Not because you hate people, not because you're antisocial, but because somewhere along the way, being around others began to feel emotionally expensive. For many people who prefer solitude, this story doesn't start in adulthood. It begins much earlier in rooms that looked normal from the outside. Sometimes it starts in homes where love existed but emotional space did not. A child might have learned that their feelings were too much, too dramatic, too sensitive, too inconvenient. Maybe every mistake was magnified, every emotion corrected, every attempt at expression met with criticism, sarcasm, or dismissal, not always cruelly, sometimes quietly, sometimes unintentionally. But over time, something subtle begins to happen inside a child when their emotional world keeps colliding with resistance. They start editing themselves. They lower their voice. They hide their reactions. They stop sharing certain thoughts. Not because they want to, but because it becomes easier than facing that small sting of being misunderstood again. Psychologists sometimes call this adaptation, but to the person living it, it feels more like shrinking, like slowly folding parts of yourself away just to keep the peace. And when a child spends years learning that their natural emotional expression creates friction, they begin searching for the only place where they don't have to perform. Solitude, because when you're alone, there's no audience, no corrections, no subtle signals that you've said too much or not enough. Alone, you can exist without translating yourself. For many people, this discovery becomes a quiet refuge, a place where their nervous system can finally rest. And the longer someone relies on this refuge, the more their mind begins associating solitude with safety. Not loneliness, safety. This is why people who prefer being alone often describe social environments as exhausting in ways that are hard to explain. It's not just conversation. It's the invisible monitoring happening underneath it. Reading expressions, anticipating reactions, adjusting tone, choosing words carefully. It's the constant background question that whispers, "Am I too much right now?" When that question follows someone long enough, solitude begins to feel like the only place where the question disappears. But childhood isn't the only place this pattern begins. Sometimes it starts later after a series of quiet emotional injuries. A friendship that slowly turned cold. A relationship where vulnerability was used as a weapon. A moment where trust was offered sincerely and returned with indifference. Experiences like these don't always explode dramatically. Many of them are quiet. But quiet wounds can still change the way a person moves through the world. Imagine placing your hand on a hot stove once. You burn yourself badly. The next time you walk into a kitchen, you don't casually place your hand on surfaces anymore. You move carefully. You check first. You hesitate. Emotional pain teaches the same kind of caution. When someone has been misunderstood, rejected, or hurt enough times, their mind begins building invisible walls, not to punish others, but to protect the fragile places that were bruised before. This is where solitude often becomes more than comfort. It becomes control. When you're alone, you can control the environment. You can control the emotional temperature of the room. You can control how much of yourself is exposed. And for someone whose emotional boundaries were crossed too many times, that control feels deeply stabilizing. But here's the quiet truth most people don't see. People who prefer solitude are often not empty of connection. They are full of it. Their inner world is rich with thoughts, reflections, memories, and emotions that run deep beneath the surface. In fact, many people who choose solitude are highly sensitive to emotional energy. They notice shifts in tone, tension in conversations, and the subtle moods of others long before anyone else does. Imagine walking through the world with the emotional volume turned slightly higher than everyone around you. Every conversation carries more weight. Every conflict echoes longer. Every moment of tension lingers in the body. For someone like this, constant social interaction can feel like standing in a room where the music never stops playing. Eventually, the nervous system craves silence. Solitude becomes the place where the noise fades, where thoughts can unfold slowly without interruption, where emotions can settle like dust after a storm. And in that quiet space, many people discover parts of themselves they couldn't hear when the world was louder. They think more deeply. They observe more carefully. They feel more honestly, which is why people who prefer being alone are often mistaken as distant or detached. But the truth is almost the opposite. They are not disconnected from the world. They are often overwhelmed by it, so they step back, not to escape life but to process it. Yet even with this understanding, many people who prefer solitude still carry a quiet guilt about it. They wonder if something is wrong with them, if they're broken, if they're avoiding something they should be fixing. Because society has a very loud idea about what a healthy life should look like. Full social calendars, constant interaction, large circles of friends. And when someone doesn't naturally move toward that kind of life, it can feel like they're failing some invisible test. But human personalities are far more diverse than the scripts we're handed. Some people recharge through crowds. Others recharge through quiet. Neither is inherently wrong. But the difference between healthy solitude and painful isolation lies in one important question. Is the distance chosen from peace or from fear? Sometimes solitude is a form of healing, a space where someone rebuilds their sense of self after years of emotional noise. Other times, solitude becomes a hiding place where old wounds quietly dictate the limits of connection. And the tricky part is that both experiences can look identical from the outside. Two people sitting alone in a room. One feels calm, the other feels trapped. Understanding this difference is part of the slow work of self-awareness, because many people who prefer solitude eventually realize something surprising. Their desire to be alone was never about rejecting people. It was about protecting their authenticity. They were tired of performing versions of themselves that felt safer for others, tired of smiling through conversations that drained them, tired of shrinking their emotional world so it wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Solitude gave them permission to exist without distortion. But healing doesn't necessarily mean abandoning solitude. It means redefining the relationship with it. Instead of hiding inside it, solitude can become a place of restoration. A quiet room where the mind clears, where identity forms without pressure, where a person slowly learns to trust their own voice again. And when that inner trust begins to grow, something interesting happens. Connection stops feeling like a threat. Not every connection, at least. Because the goal was never to force yourself into constant social energy. The goal is to build relationships where you don't have to disappear to maintain them, where silence is allowed, where emotional depth isn't treated as strange, where being yourself doesn't require constant editing. For someone who spent years protecting themselves through solitude, these kinds of connections can feel almost unfamiliar at first, like stepping into sunlight after spending a long time indoors. Your eyes adjust slowly. You test the warmth carefully, but little by little, something inside begins to realize that not every room is dangerous. Not every person is waiting to correct, reject, or misunderstand you. And that realization doesn't erase the comfort of solitude. It simply adds another possibility. A life where alone time remains sacred, but connection is no longer something you have to defend yourself from. Because preferring solitude was never a flaw in the first place. It was a signal. A quiet intelligence inside you saying, I need space to breathe. And in a world that moves too quickly, demands too much noise, and rarely pauses long enough to listen to the inner voice, that instinct is not weakness, it's awareness. The people who learn to sit comfortably in their own company often develop something rare. They become familiar with their own thoughts. They build a relationship with themselves. They understand their emotional landscape in ways that people constantly distracted by noise sometimes never do. And that self-relationship becomes a kind of compass. It guides them toward environments that feel honest, toward people who respect their quiet, toward lives that are not built on constant performance. So if you've ever felt strange for preferring solitude, if you've ever wondered why being alone feels peaceful while crowded rooms feel heavy, it may not be because you're broken. It may simply mean you learned at some point in your life how valuable your inner world truly is, and you chose to protect it, not by shutting the world out completely, but by making sure that the door to your mind and heart is opened carefully, intentionally, and only for those who know how to enter without leaving damage behind.